Ahoy! After New World had its big info drop the other day, various news outlets are now posting their articles, and we get quite a bit of extra info, some specific questions that were asked by just some of them that we didn't hear about before. I want to give you a bit of a selection of the info that I think is interesting. All the sources will be linked down below. It's a mix of all of those. The first one is that many people want to make a character on Fresh Start but already have too many characters, and there will therefore be an increase with the release of Aeternum. We'll now be having a maximum of 4 character slots per region. If you haven't played in a while, the current maximum is 3, and you can at this point have multiple characters on the same server, so not a massive bump, but it is nice if you want to make that one extra character for Fresh. Some of the journalists also questioned the whole ARPG labeling. The way they ended up explaining that was that the combat and the storytelling and everything is now ARPG, but the game has MMO elements, and one statement was, I think you could call it an ARPG or MMO, whatever you want, but it's really either, depending on how you play the game. And I think that's fair enough. I guess, again, this is just a marketing thing, but at least they're acknowledging that this game is also still an MMO. When asked why New World Aeternum and Throne and Liberty are releasing so close together, Scott was kind of saying that he's just focused on New World Aeternum, so that doesn't really concern him much as far as decisions go. But they did say that both are different games and also have different price models, and I guess that's kind of hinting at Throne and Liberty having more pay-to-win potential and also being very focused on guild combat, which is kind of more of an afterthought in New World Aeternum in comparison. Multiple of the journalists actually pointed out that the PC players felt kind of left out or let down, and were asking what PC players are even getting now. Their answer was that they're getting the raid and the free-for-all PvP zone, obviously. They're getting optimizations, which many people who have played the beta said are actually very good. In my case, I can't use the DirectX 12 version, so I can't agree with that, but for those who can, there are apparently significant optimization improvements. And the combat improvements, also more of a debatable point. Then they're also saying that having more players in general is good for everyone, which is obviously true because content is easier to do when you can find a group for it. They are aiming for a stable and bug-free release because they now had more time to do that. That's something they always say. If that's going to be the case this time, who knows? The game felt relatively less buggy compared to other PTR releases, but that doesn't necessarily translate onto live anyways, so I remain skeptical. And then they also say that what they did now allows them to focus on content in the future. That, however, makes it odd that they haven't released a roadmap yet. But what they are saying about this is they want the community to be part of the dev cycle. They have PvP ideas in the works, and they're saying they are planning to push towards PvP a little bit more because they've done so much for PvE. But they're also saying, as the game launches, we are going to pay really close attention to balance changes we made, see what they have to say, and we're going to use that to help us make decisions in the change we make. Now, this can of course refer to balance changes to some degree, but it also sounds like the larger content plan is somewhat based around waiting to see what the console players actually want in terms of content, which I guess is why they haven't done anything in regards to a roadmap yet. At this point, I quickly want to let you know, if you want early training tips for the expansion and for Fresh Start, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to all my patrons who already do that. And if you enjoyed this video so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Now, we already know of 2 ways to 725 gear score. On one hand, going through the new PvP zone, and on the other hand, through the raid. However, there is a third way, and weirdly in one of the interviews they say that this is a neat bonus coming for all the 3v3 and OPR players, but then in another interview they outright say it, that you will be able to get a weekly cash from that, which gives us 725 as well, or at least has the potential to do so. When asked about this new path to max gear score and what happens to other named items, they say that they don't want named items to be upgradable, only artifacts, and their goal is to incentivize playing the new content, which means they're kind of forcing you to play either the PvP island or the raid if you want to have the new stuff. They think that 700 gear score will keep value at least for a while, because you may have optimized perk combinations on that compared to the random perks that you get on most of the new gear, at least initially. I find this very unfortunate because it just makes so much of the game content useless, and this has especially been a problem with named items in the open world, for example, for so long now, and I would hope that they find some better way to handle that at some point down the line. When asked about why they focused so massively on this entire player experience overhaul, they talked about what they saw in terms of player numbers. They saw a massive drop-off with a quest that required you to do the Amrine expedition at launch. So wherever there was required group content, they saw a drop-off, and when they replaced it with solo content, they saw the curve smoothing and players would stick with the game. They created part of that to players not being in the initial rush, making it more difficult to find players that help them with those lower level expeditions. But I think that's not even the biggest point. I think it's just the general unwillingness to engage with group content any more than necessary while leveling. This is an issue that most MMOs are facing, which is why group content in the leveling process is almost always optional. They're also adding the repeatable soul trials, and they work a little bit differently from what I expected, because it's a daily rotation of 3 soul trials. So somewhat similar to the expedition system, but it rotates daily, and you can do them to earn rewards such as endgame artifact weapons, which is exactly 1 new artifact as far as I know, and endgame gear and more, which I think is relatively low gear score, so not something you really keep. I think they will be more relevant on Fresh Start for the dark matter and gold you can get from them. The main reason the ammo removal happened because they generally wanted to simplify a lot of the items, and they specifically say they changed this for the controller as well, because obviously navigating a huge menu is more annoying with the controller, so this wasn't primarily a balanced thing or anything. The grind to level cap has also been reduced drastically from roughly 150 hours, I guess if you don't have any resources or anything to help you along the way, to around 40 to 60 hours. The leveling path itself also seems very streamlined and focused on questing. I don't necessarily hate that. I do think that you lose a lot of the early game experience by the early game passing by so quickly, which is unfortunate. Contrary to what some people speculated, the PvE stagger is an actual stagger and not cosmetic. However, it has limited by a cooldown that triggers after a certain number of staggers, depending on the weapon. For melee attacks, you usually can do 2 to 3 staggers before the cooldown triggers, and then it's a cooldown of 2 seconds. For range attack, the cooldown triggers after a single stagger, but same 2 seconds cooldown. Ability staggers are completely independent of that. In the context of swimming, the devs were asked if they plan to add any aquatic content, underwater treasures, or perhaps sailing, and they say there's nothing planned at the moment, which is a different tone from what they were saying when they previously, like a long time ago, talked about swimming, but fair enough. Plans change. Some players have bugs with their characters' faces at the moment. Those should be fixed with the Aeternum release. Apparently some of that accidentally got into the Season 5 client, and that kind of messed up some faces. When asked about ensuring the survival of legacy servers, they said that new players will be able to join legacy servers if they want to play with their friends, and they also expect players to come back to New World in general, so they hope some past players on legacy servers will come back along with that. Also, they think that the general influx of players in the matchmaking pool, in expeditions, OPR, and arenas should help queues pop much quicker and should be good in general anyways. I guess it depends on how many players actually go on the console exclusive servers. When asked about how they plan to regain the trust of the PC community, they basically give us some very standard reply. Moving forward, our goal is to be communicative and as transparent as we can with our players and to listen to their feedback. Let me just put it this way. That is a very bold statement to make again after already having said this multiple times and done the opposite multiple times. There's also a statement from Scott about the general turning sentiment towards the game. And he said, I think once people get their hands on the open beta, they realize that we're doing a lot for PC players. I talked about what they're doing for PC players earlier, so just form your own opinion here. Consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you enjoyed this. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video. They get early training tips in return. And thank you for watching. SLOTH out.